Apocalyptic literature is very challenging, and there have been many debates over what do all of these symbols inside of the book of Revelation actually mean. Many ministries are predicated on their supposed insights, their Gnostic knowledge of the book of Revelation. I was reading in the paper. That's Revelation 15. That's not the way we read the book of Revelation. We read it as apocalyptic literature and not as the daily news. Finally, we get to the book of Revelation. This is apocalyptic literature. This is the toughest of all, probably. We think that it's kind of wild, but this was very common type of writing for quite a long time, from the 7th century BC until the 2nd century AD. And basically, the book of Revelation can be divided into two parts. Chapters 1 through 3, you've got the messages to the church. And then, starting in chapter 4, you really begin the revelation, the vision of John. So how do we read this thing? Here's some tips. Read it like an editorial cartoon. Imagine, it's the day after a presidential election. You go to the newspaper, you open it up, or it's on the front page. There's a huge elephant, and he's got his foot coming down on top of the donkey's head. What would you do with that? Oh, Republicans must have had a landslide. You know that. Why? Because you knew that that symbol represented Republican, that symbol represented Democrat. I knew that there was an election going on, so I know how to interpret that cartoon. That's what we need to be thinking like if we're going to get what's going on in the first century book of Revelation. I need to know what was going on a lot to understand what the symbolism was. It's like an editorial cartoon. There's also symbols. Got to figure out what's symbolic, what's figurative, what's normal. Here's a good rule. If the symbol is not normal, it's probably a symbol. It's raining cats and dogs. Are there felines and puppy dogs falling from the sky? No, it's a symbol, it's a saying that we have. And the same thing is true in the book of Revelation. There's symbols of stuff. We need to know what the first century knew to actually get it. Here's an example of a symbol. Revelation 9, 7 through 8. The appearance of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle, and on their heads, these are the locusts, appeared to be crowns of gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like the hair of women, and their teeth were like the teeth of lions. Have you ever seen a locust that looks like that? No. So what is it? A locust? Probably not. It's probably a symbol. Here are some helps from Howard Hendricks recommending 10 principles for interpreting Revelation. Number 1, use the literal sense unless there is a good reason not to. Don't spiritualize. Read it literally unless there's a good reason not to. Use the figurative sense when the passage tells you to do so, especially in dreams and vision. 3, use the figurative sense if a literal meaning is impossible or absurd. God doesn't confound us with nonsense, but He does use symbolism to make points. But these symbols are not absurdities. Figurative language can be both descriptive and precise. Number 4, use the figurative sense of a literal meaning would involve something immoral. Use the figurative sense if you're seeing something that's like, that's sinful. Okay, that's not something that I'm supposed to be taking in. For example, when Jesus talks about eating His flesh and drinking His blood, we know that's not what we're supposed to be doing that. Even the Pharisees understood it was figurative. Number 5, use the figurative sense if the expression is an obvious figure of speech. Look for words like, as, so similes, metaphors, especially in the Psalms or prophetic books. Number 6, use the figurative sense if a literal interpretation goes contrary to the context and the scope of the passage. The lion of the tribe of Judah in Revelation is not talking about a four-legged beast with a mane who roars. It's talking about Jesus. Use the figurative if a literal interpretation goes contrary to the general character and the style of the book. The shadow of His wings. God's not a chicken. It's figurative language. By the way, we hear feminists use this a lot. God describes himself as a mother. That's right, so did Paul, but he was clearly a man. It's figurative language to teach us more about the character of God, how expansive it is, and all the attributes that he has. Use the figurative sense if a literal interpretation goes contrary to the plan and purpose of the author. Understand the context of the text. How does the verse compare to the rest of the paragraph and the rest of the book? How does it compare? Number 9. Use the figurative sense if a literal interpretation involves a contradiction of other scriptures, because the Bible is unified, no mistakes. It's infallible. It's not capable of mistakes. And finally, number 10, use the figurative sense if a literal interpretation would involve a contradiction in doctrine. Study, our interpretation needs to be consistent with the scriptures themselves. Perhaps this more than anything else demonstrates that biblical interpretation, biblical hermeneutics, it is both an art and a science.